So I've completed Phantom Liberty. That's right, Tunes, several days ago I was lucky enough to be given a review code for the Cyberpunk expansion and Update 2.0. I've had time to play through the new story, dive headfirst into the various mechanical changes like weapons, cyberware, perks, cars and more, and just generally experience the tremendous bulk of what's on offer. And oh my god, do we have a lot to talk about. Spoiler free, of course. So, with that said, let's run through my impressions of the spy thriller story that is Phantom Liberty, after which I'll be breaking down the biggest changes of Update 2.0. Now, as someone who's already broken down the mechanics of the old game in way too much detail, believe me when I say this is basically a remake with how much has changed. Most of which is awesome, but personally there's a couple things that I will miss. Still, we'll get to that in a bit. First, a bit on my impressions of the expansion, which if you haven't already, you can pick up a DRM-free copy of on GOG via my link in the description after you're done here. It's a great way to support the channel at no extra cost to you, and now, let's get to it. So, as you probably already know, Phantom Liberty at its core is a spy thriller expansion. From start to finish, V feels like the unwitting protagonist caught up in a high-stakes but also very personal tale. We'll meet characters like Idris Elba's Solomon Reed, NUSA President Rosalind Myers, Colonel Kurt Hansen, and most importantly, So-Mi, aka Songbird, who'll kick this whole thing off by giving us a call at the 11th hour and sending us into Dogtown, all on the promise that she has the ability to save V's life. So begins Phantom Liberty. Cue adrenaline-pumping action sequences, powerful new gadgets and gizmos, and a quirky one-liner here or there. That said, the expansion is not heart-stopping action the whole time, nor should it be. Some of the high points in this storyline, for me in fact, don't feature action at all, and focus a lot more on character interactions than shooting your way out of a situation. CDPR's ability to tell a great story has always been one of their strongest strengths, and I think the balance between action and story here lands pretty much just right. Switching from one to the other often enough to hold my absolute attention and emotional investment. That said, the main story doesn't have to be a non-stop ride all the way through, with plenty of opportunities between main missions to go off and experience Dogtown, as well as the new side quests and gigs on offer. Most of these are fresh stories in their own right, though some do have nice little nods to events from the base game. We'll circle back to them in a minute. First though, let's talk about how Phantom Liberty's storyline compares to that of the base game. For starters, it's a lot more focused, and linear for the most part. Whilst the main story had you going off completing multiple main quests at your leisure, with multiple plot threads, storylines and friendships to complete which eventually culminate with your fateful visit to Embers, the main quest line of Phantom Liberty occurs pretty sequentially. That said, your choices can of course affect how future missions play out, and most situations can be resolved in multiple ways. This becomes more apparent towards the end of the story, which without spoiling anything, let's just say you're gonna have to play Phantom Liberty more than once to experience everything. And by that, I don't mean just a slightly different outcome or slightly varying dialogue at the very end. No, there are choices in this which can send you down wildly opposing paths. Different characters, locations, hell, a fundamentally different experience in places. Seriously, in a way, it's got more variation than the endings for the base game, which is saying a lot. Oh, and on that topic, I can confirm that Phantom Liberty also provides a new ending to the base game. I will say nothing more than that, but it's in there, and I'll do a breakdown comparing it to the other endings in several weeks' time, probably. Now, one of Phantom Liberty's strongest elements is without a doubt the new characters that it introduces, and the lore, which gets expanded upon as a result. To summarize briefly then, we have Songbird, or So-Mi, a talented FIA netrunner who could probably rival Spider Murphy in terms of skill, and seems the only one aside from Alt, of course, who can exert any kind of power over the relic. She's probably the heart of this expansion, with your developing relationship to her playing an utterly crucial role in the events to unfold. Next to So-Mi is Rosalind Myers, president of the NUSA and former CEO of Militech, our encounter with whom sets in motion all of the events to come thereafter. She's not only a great lens with which we compare life in the NUSA to that of NC, but she's also an interesting and multi-layered character in her own right, thrown into a situation where she has the opposite of total control. And the plane crash rescue, which has been heavily featured in trailers for months now, now that I think back, is a real highlight which kicks off this expansion with a bang. And if you want my advice, I'd say it's a moment definitely worth savouring. However much you want to get into the rest of the story, just don't rush that part. Take your time, read the shards and emails lying around, and explore all the extra dialogue with Rosalind, because she is a character with some of the most unique insights, with being the president and all, that you'll get to meet. Oh, and before I forget, Phantom Liberty also expands slightly on our collection of tarot cards, and much like the base game, where we find them and their explanations can serve as insights or even warnings in relation to characters or events to come. I did an explanation video for all the ones in the base game, and I will be doing another for the ones in Phantom Liberty. Another character who's been expanded upon and changed hugely from the base game though is Pacifica's fixer Mr. Hands, the faceless enigma who gets us contact with the Voodoo Boys and provides just one gig in the base game. But no more. Hands has a very big role to play in Phantom Liberty. Whilst Dogtown is run by Colonel Hanson, serving almost as a military mayor of sorts, Hands then is Dogtown's equivalent of Rogue, a fixer of great means whose nickname may derive from just how many cookie jars he has his hands in. He's a crucial presence during our time in Dogtown, with not just more gigs, but also other aid from time to time. And it's clear when coming across him in the game that he's been more or less redesigned from the ground up, with a different costume, different appearance if you ever did the glitch to see him in the old game, and even a new voice actor. Pacifica never felt like a completed district before, with Mr. Hands being a big part of that problem. Fortunately now though, it is a problem no more. But most notably of course is Idris Elba's Solomon Reed, and I think it's clear now why they chose to cast such a well-known actor for the role, aside from the obvious thing that stars generate interest. Solomon Reed is a guy with presence, and not the type you get for Christmas. I'm talking stage presence. Much less volatile than Keanu Reeves' Johnny Silverhand, with much more of a stoic charm, which directly rivals Johnny's philosophy of screw the system. Much like Somi, your relationship with Solomon is going to be a crucial aspect to Phantom Liberty, so pay careful attention when you're making decisions which involve him. As the character you probably spend the most time with in the expansion, putting another A-lister in the role was in my opinion a good, but no doubt very expensive choice. Speaking of which though, CDPR did say a while back that this is their most expensive expansion ever, which truly, after sinking over 60 hours into it, I can really see why. The production quality of this thing is insane, and it really feels like they've spared no expense in any corner. With gorgeously designed locations, multiple returning voice actors, as well as plenty of new ones, not to mention the insanely good theme song and title sequence which rivals the likes of Skyfall and No Time to Die. Seriously, David Pachido is absolutely right when he says you're gonna fucking cry, after which you'll probably play it on repeat because it's a really good song. Overall, whilst I have a couple bones to pick with the 2.0 element, or rather I don't yet know how I feel about all of those changes, Phantom Liberty itself is one of the best freaking stories I have ever played in a video game. And bear in mind, I'm not sponsored to say this in any way. I received early access with no expectation to do anything. It just is my genuine opinion. I don't want to talk much more about the main story. I think everyone should experience that for themselves, but before moving on, here's a couple notes of advice for you. 1. Make plenty of hard saves as you go through, so that you can go back and see how other choices would have turned out. And 2. Take your time with it. Don't rush the main story and use the natural breakpoints to go off and experience some of the side content. It not only gives the spy thriller elements time to breathe, but it means you can cross off most of the side quests too by the time you reach the end of the main one. 3 then, and this isn't something I did because I wanted this review made for today, but start again from the beginning. I mean literally, the beginning of Cyberpunk 2077. Jumping into Phantom Liberty amidst the myriad of changes to the base game was disorienting, to say the least. And whilst grasping the new systems during Phantom Liberty was still a fun experience, don't get me wrong, experiencing those systems from the ground up by starting again is no doubt a more fulfilling one. Luckily, you have 5 days, starting tomorrow, to get up to scratch with a 2.0 playthrough before Phantom Liberty drops. Plenty of time, not for a full run, but at least enough to speed your way through to the end of the Voodoo Boy questline, after which Phantom Liberty begins. If you are doing it that way though, then make sure to complete all the relationship questlines from the base game, preferably before you begin, but definitely before you finish Phantom Liberty. There's a couple little reasons to do this, not utterly crucial per se, but you'll just have a better experience, trust me. But vague discussion of story elements aside, let's get down to some of the new features, starting with the brand new district of Dogtown. Transforming the eastern side of Pacifica into an actual location finally, Dogtown feels way bigger than you'd expect, serving as a densely packed area utterly teeming with things to do. It's so varied in fact that it's even categorized into 4 different sub-districts of its own: Longshore Stacks, Luxor Heights, Golden Pacific, and Terra Cognita, all of which capture a slightly different tone amidst this bizarre wasteland come metropolis. Seriously, I've spent over 50 hours in here and still don't entirely know my way around, with things like different vertical levels and lots of buildings you can enter being used to break the place up. Truly, it feels so different from anywhere else in Night City, and amidst that and the mechanical changes, I did sometimes find myself forgetting that I was still playing Cyberpunk. In a good way, like a more polished sequel, or a remake, which is kind of essentially what this is. In addition to Pacifica itself, the resident gang of the Voodoo Boys also gets a huge expansion in here, with enemies then comprised of VDBs, Barghest Militia, and of course the ever-present Scavs, who seem to seep their way into every dark corner like a festering mold. No NCPD in Dogtown though, but if you commit a crime, you'll instead get attacked by a specialist group of Barghest soldiers. So it is a lawless town, but actually not entirely lawless, apparently. Spoiling nothing about the 9 new gigs on offer, but I'm pleased to say I'd probably rank them all A or S tier compared to those of the base game. Every single one is a mini story in its own right, which can last between 20 minutes up to an hour sometimes, if you're like me and search tirelessly for clues and shards and every single little hidden detail. Additionally, each of these have more of an aftermath than the other gigs in the game, with bonus rewards or encounters which can be unlocked afterwards depending on your choices. Plus, there's about 8 to 10 new side quests outside of the gigs which sort of function in a similar way. They're just not directly commissioned by Mr. Hands. So plenty of side content just there alone. No new NCPD scanner hustles sadly, though that does make sense considering there's no NCPD in Dogtown. However, we do have events called Increased Criminal Activity, which are basically big fights with lots of enemies, i.e. suspected organised crimes, but bigger than those in the base game. Overall, Dogtown is more than just another district of NC, it's basically a brand new city in and of itself. Not as vast and huge as Tucson say, but with probably as much content packed into the smaller space. Once that's all done, there's still the endless events to turn to, meaning there's never a shortage of chances to test out builds and equipment in combat. Dogtown features airdrops which continually land near you as you explore the city, with the sound effects and red smoke indicating one nearby. Of course, this will mean fighting off Barghest and possibly Voodoo Boys, which can be relatively tough fights. Worth it though, since there's seriously good rewards at the end. Each drop usually comes with a carrying capacity shard, increasing your capacity by 2, as well as item components, skill shards, and weapons. Character skills have been expanded on from the base game and play a much more noticeable part now, with stat boosts and other rewards unlocking as you level them up. Crafting components will also be crucial to keep in heavy supply, since crafting, whilst simplified technically, plays an expanded role, shall we say. It's no longer intrinsically linked to the tech tree, but weapons and cyberware will both require upgrading to get the best out of your gear. This again is why I recommend a fresh run, since whilst I found myself with incredibly high level gear when booting up my level 50 save, what I lacked was the ability to upgrade it to the maximum level, whereas playing from the fresh start should give you the time to acquire a proportionately balanced number of crafting components as you go. A good habit to get into in fact is to pick up and then disassemble higher quality items from the world, since that'll keep you ticking up with a fresh supply of components as you switch out for more powerful gear, which you want to level up to its maximum. Next to airdrops then is Muammar El Capitan Reyes' new business venture, hiring us to acquire cars off the streets and deliver them to another location for a modest payment. Usually, this will involve fulfilling some sort of bonus objective, which whilst not crucial to the mission's success, nets you a greater reward. Getting it there within a time limit, delivering undamaged, and escaping pursuers on the way are all ones which came up for me. In fact, the reward payout is similar to that which we find in the airdrops, i.e. a crate of goodies, but with an added bonus of A, discount coupons on new cars, and B, unlocking new vehicles. And I do mean new vehicles, not from the base game, on Reyes' website, Autofixer. Yes, buying cars now is no longer a case of gallivanting about Night City and picking up the cars in person. Instead, in this modern age of the new net, you simply point and click to unlock said vehicle as a new summon. Do I like this change? I mean, it's fine. The cars still have a story behind them in their website description, and I guess it's more convenient than having to drive to a specific place to get the car. I get why they've done it, and since cars in general are way more interesting now now anyway, acquiring a new one ASAP from any computer with a net connection, I think is probably a good move. We'll circle back round to new cars in a minute, because now it's time to break down all the big changes in just 2.0. And yeah, we might be here a while longer. Starting off with a nice, simple UI change. The phone now functions differently, with texts and contacts operating on separate tabs, and texts arranged by order of most recent. It's just a useful little quality of life update. Additionally, quest logs now feature relevant shards pertaining to the quest in question, so you can look back on extra key information without having to remember it all. Also, there's finally a reason to visit food vendors, since many of them offer iconic items which grant small but permanent extra buffs. Now, as I already mentioned, crafting now operates entirely separate from perks, with all items available to craft at any time, provided you have the spec and the materials. You don't need Edgerunner Artisan anymore, which I think overall is a good move, since it paves the way for non-hacking builds to not have to have 18 tech in order to get some of the very best weapons, instead focusing more on which combat moves are going to be utilized and how powerful you want them to be. Perks are now divided into tiers, something you can test out right now with the link on my community tab to CDPR's build planner, with 15 attributes needed to unlock most of the things in the skill tree, though you'll have to get the full 20 if you want to have the most ultra powerful creme de la creme perks. Things such as Edgerunner, which gives you a major boost in the new Cyberware capacity system. Now, since Phantom Liberty has increased the level cap to 60, it's now possible to attain a total of 81 attribute points, as far as I can tell. We could, in that case, just do a balanced spec of 15 into everything, unlocking most abilities to be experienced and enjoyed. Indeed, it is fully possible to experience multiple builds in one playthrough this way, with perks being individually refundable at any time for no cost. You just can't remove a perk earlier in the tree if you have dependables coming off of it. Doing this, I was able to switch out my stealth netrunner build to a badass Sandevistan spy build on a total whim. However, speccing mostly into all of the attributes isn't necessarily the best way to play, as you'll never get to experience some of the most powerful abilities on offer, and it may be worth picking a build and sticking to it to max some stats whilst neglecting the abilities of others. Though one tree I do think is utterly overpowered, and now I can't live without it, is the air dashing skills from reflexes. Back in the base game, I utilized the triple jump a lot, through a combination of epic fortified ankles and the maneuvering system. But this is on a whole nother level. Fully specking into air dash perks will allow you to get around Night City incredibly quickly, not to mention moving around in combat with the speed of a Sandevistan without actually needing the Sandevistan. Time just won't be slowed. If I were to compare the feeling of using this to another game, I'd say it's kind of like a fully leveled Cal Kestis in Jedi Survivor, who has a similar degree of maneuverability when navigating the world. Is it too overpowered? It would have been in the old game, but 2.0 is a lot harder than before, and boss fights especially are now pretty tough even with this capability. Without it, actually, I dread to think. And by the way, briefly I did replay the Sun ending in 2.0, including the Smasher fight, which I'm pleased to report is both longer now and harder.
That's what she said!
With more stages to the fight as you slowly whittle away Smash's health. I'm presuming bosses like Cyber Psychos have had a facelift as well, but I haven't got around to testing that yet. Overall, with how much and how quickly you dash about the terrain with so many enemies loaded in at once, it's seriously impressive how smooth the game remains through this. And I fully understand now just why the increased tech specs were so very hefty, because honestly, if this wasn't smooth, it would be the worst thing ever. Yet, I can run it in path-traced mode without so much as a hiccup. And I think the fact I can do that 2 weeks before the game even releases is testament to how CDPR have indeed learned their lesson on this. This ran incredibly smooth for me across the board, and honestly, colour me impressed. That's better than games I've played on their actual release. Overall though, daunting as these new perk trees may seem, they're actually remarkably simple to understand, with each attribute having 3 main focuses denoted by the 3 trees in each. Body focuses on heavy weapons like shotguns, HMGs and LMGs, with things like reduced recoil and increased obliteration. Then, this middle node focuses on health regen and damage mitigation, with the third helping you utilize the power of blunt weapons, such as a hammer or Sir John Fallistiff. All in all, what you need to become a berserker. Reflex then focuses on the mid-range ARs and SMGs, air dash, as I mentioned, and finally longer blades like katanas, as well as now Gwynblythe, White Wolf, which looks exactly like its Witcher counterpart, and it's very cool. With these These you can then block and defend bullets, as well as perform cool finishes. Onto tech then, and that's more about the items, with boosts to grenades and heals on the left, which now work on a cooldown rather than unlimited spam, making the game tougher but also more balanced. In the middle are boosts to cyberware, and on the right, increased proficiency with tech weapons. Intelligence then, as before, revolves around quick hacking and RAM recovery, with now, kind of understandably, the addition of smart guns. Whilst finally, cool is still mostly stealth based, with a node on sneak sprinting and another on throwing knives, but also a third on pistols and revolvers, for cool cowboy gunslinger builds. Cold Blood, which was a big part of the cool tree before, is now gone, which I know some people might not be happy about, though elements of that ability have been redistributed into various other places, most notably the Adrenaline Rush ability from the body section. I'll explore all of this in more detail, of course, in future videos, but for now, after you're done here, go check it out for yourself in the build planner. Now, let's take a look at changes to cyberware, and this is probably where you're going to see the most dramatic, radical alterations, and where I imagine many people may very well not be entirely happy. Okay, let's start things off here with the undeniably good. The new menu, for starters, shows where on your body the cyberware is going to be installed and is defo a cool facelift. What's more, when exiting a Ripper's menu, you'll actually get up from the operating table, adding just a pinch more immersion to things. Now, I gotta say, overall, cyberware now is an expansion on what was available before, and I cannot wait to make videos on it all. With legs, for example, we have the new option to forego extra jumps, with instead a piece of cyberware that lets us run faster. A very welcome addition to that family of cyberware, and there are entries like this all across the board. There's now a range of Kuroshi optics to choose from, specializing in scanning people, cameras, or landmines, whilst there's also the option to trade out a Sandevistan, Cyberdeck, or Berserk for an item to increase cyberware capacity, instead becoming stronger in place of a special ability. But, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing, I'm still on the fence with this, I'll form my full opinion after I've produced some dedicated videos, but the way some things work now is completely different. Case in point, Sandevistans. No longer are we going to be running around with a 2-second cooldown on the TNT Mark IV. In fact, we're not going to be running around with the TNT Mark IV ever again. It's gone, along with the names of some other pieces of equipment, in place of what I can only describe as a more streamlined approach. Tiers of common through to legendary are no longer all permanently available at various Rippers across the entire game, with the tier of available cyberware in question instead leveling up alongside you. So, with a level 1 character, everything you can purchase will be common, and with a level 50 character, a visit to the clinic results in a list of full tier 5 items with that orange colouring, with ones that don't have a lower tier counterpart full on unlocking as you get to higher levels. So, in a nice way, you will be seeing more stuff appear overall as you go through the game. From what I can tell, it seems you can buy anything from any Ripper now, which I guess removes, say, that contentious issue of punching fingers, but also makes it less of a treasure hunt to find specific bits of gear. Don't fully quote me on this, but it certainly feels like at level 50, we can buy any item from any Ripper, at least when I was searching around. And yes, whilst the TNT Mark IV will sadly be mourned, it does get a decent replacement. Less of an endless Sandevistan though, and more of one that you're free to toggle on and off at will, with a depleting meter that recharges when not in use. As usual, some Sandevistans slow time less and offer other bonuses too, whilst others are all in on heavy time-slowing capabilities. I'll cover them all in another dedicated video. Now, my main problem here lies not in the fact that they're rebalancing systems per se. I fully think that this is a much better game than before, and I'm seriously loving it. My issue is in how these radical changes fully overwrite the old game. It feels somewhat more like a sequel sometimes, which would be fine if not for the fact that what it actually is a full-on replacement of what came before. And I do believe that a handful of people are going to wake up to find their favourite way to play is no longer viable. And on top of that, pretty much every build tutorial is going to be made obsolete. It's certainly an exciting prospect, first and foremost, to see what crazy new stuff people are going to come up with, but aside from that, I really can't help but mourn a little for what we've lost. Epic fortified ankles, for example, aka the hover legs, gone. Replaced with something better, of course, the air dash, but still sad to see it go. What's more, modding cyberware with specific extra capabilities has been replaced by simply upgrading it. Sure, we can still find perks which maybe enhance certain bits of cyberware, but that's not the same as as slapping, say, 3 legendary heatsinks on a TNC Mark IV. We can still reduce Sand Eversting cooldown, by the way, by upgrading it, but ultimately I think mods provided more of a range of boosts than the one-size-fits-all improvement that is just upgrading it. Look, my point here is that, yes, whilst the devs may have looked at some things and gone, actually, that doesn't work as well as we thought, let's scrap it, the problem lies in that every time you do that, it ultimately changes the entire game forever. A little bit. Doing that on a scale such as this then, and you have completely changed the game's identity. Improving it, yes, but killing the old one. Funnily enough, I can't help but liken this to what happens with V and Soulkiller in the base game. Though I guess sometimes, in order to save something, you first have to kill it. And regardless of the positives which may come from that, parts of your original identity will be gone. With the new you serving as a convincing, often superior copy, but with parts of who they were before now gone for good, never coming back. Anyway, with the slightly more negative rant out the way, here's some good news about Berserk. It's actually really good now, for anyone looking to use a melee-based build, sending you into a rage mode of sorts where you can't die, but can only use melee weapons. Superhero landing is still a thing, but not for every model, and thankfully is manually activated now. In fact, that's what you can see here in the New Ways to Play trailer. As for Cyberdecks, they've probably been the OS least touched by this update, and looking at how they function, I think they've actually done a really cool thing here, with 6 base models, maybe more, all of which lean into a different specialization. The Tetratronic Rippler, for example, provides bonuses when you use different types of quick hacks together and with weapons, whereas the Netwatch NetDriver now is fully specialized for hacking devices, offering bonuses when hacking enemies through cameras and such. Whilst the Raven Microcyber is perfect for contagion, say, since it has boosts to its spread. Quick hacks themselves then seem fairly similar to before, though maybe with 1 or 2 tweaks to stats. As for us getting hacked by enemies now, yes, netrunners are much more threatening, and will utilize a much larger range of quick hacks on us. Things like Weapon Glitch, Reboot Optics, and Short Circuit all spring to mind. Overall then, while Cyberware has been one of the most major things to change in the base game, I reckon it may wind up being one of the most controversial, especially to people who've got comfortable doing things a certain way in the old game. But now for a change that I really love, or rather several changes, which all kind of lean into one another. Cars, vehicle combat, and police. For starters, small thing, you may find some cars sound a little different. The Caliburn, for example, I noticed, has a lot more power behind its engine, whilst the starter car in the Nomad Prologue, you can now hear V's modification, and it doesn't sound healthy. But bigger than that, some cars from the base game now come equipped with guns. For example, the Shion Coyote, which I rated the number 2 best car in the game, we'll see if that holds up when compared to some of the new cars. Though being able to blitz through roadblocks with James Bond style front-mounted Gatling guns is certainly a fun improvement. Though that said, sometimes it is just better and more precise to shoot with your own gun through the window. You can point whichever way you want then, and don't have to maneuver the car to be facing the enemy. Again, vehicle changes are probably something best experienced in a new playthrough of the base game. Dogtown isn't really somewhere you need nor would want to drive in, and getting into long, high-speed car chases is something best done on more open road. Combat mode is activated by pressing Alt on a keyboard to bring up the crosshair, which will remove access to things like the radio. So driving basically has 2 modes now. It's essentially GTA combat. Punctured tires will be highlighted with little red text flashing up saying punctured, and whilst it would feel like you can just drive away from hairy situations if you're in a hurry, other vehicles are actually remarkably tenacious at keeping up with you now. And I remember a few times getting shot at only to turn around and find a bike literally behind me, forcing me to slow down, stop focusing on the road ahead, and shoot the crap out of them. It defo makes the roads of Night City feel a lot more alive than before, improving and changing the driving element of this game forever. Rest assured then, I will have a breakdown and ranking on all the new vehicles coming in the next months, hopefully, if I can manage that. Anyway, that's all of the major points I think you need to know. It's not everything, else this video would be about 5 hours long, but it is a still rather long summary of my overall impressions. But there are definitely way more things I am absolutely dying to discuss with you in the coming weeks, including a rather unassuming new discovery I made, which when brought to light is going to turn absolutely everyone into the Charlie meme from Always Sunny, and possibly break the internet. So make sure to subscribe to find out exactly what I'm referring to. Seriously, it's big. I am so stoked to share more with you about Phantom Liberty in the coming weeks, and there are so many videos for me to make and remake for you guys. As always, thanks again to my amazing patrons for your support, especially in times where I'm pretty much too busy to make videos because I'm just playing the games, like recently. Fortunately now, that time is over, so prepare for a tidal wave of Cyberpunk content, along with a smattering of Starfield and Baldur's Gate 3 over the coming weeks, months, years, because to be honest, that's how long it's going to take me to make everything I want to make. Don't forget, if you haven't already and are planning to pick up Phantom Liberty through my link down below, as it helps out a ton and keeps me juiced up on caffeine and Nicola whilst I produce these videos. Thanks so much for watching, I'm Bram, and I'll see you soon in another video where nothing will ever be the same again.